Hello, my horror-loving dudes. I'm KillJoy Jake, and today we're going to talk about The Exorcist Believer, specifically everything we know about the film so far, considering the trailer just came out today. All right, let's get into it.
Well, sometimes that is better.
Before we talk about the trailer for The Exorcist Believer and the fact that we already got a release date for the next one coming out in 2025, we gotta go all the way back to the beginning of this nutshell. Going all the way back to 2020, a time none of us want to remember, specifically August, Morgan Creek Entertainment announced that they were going to be rebooting The Exorcist. Now, I remember the early days of this channel where I made a video about this and was freaking out. The Exorcist is one of my all-time favorite horror movies. I even got the shirt. In my opinion, there are 4 movies that you can never touch again. They're time-specific movies that you simply can't recreate the magic of. One of them is The Exorcist. If you're curious what the other ones are too, it's Jaws, Back to the Future, and Blair Witch Project. Just leave those franchises alone. Just let them be. Ben Pearson of Slash Film also noted at the time that the studio had said in the past that they would never try to reboot The Exorcist, with good reason. The reason I feel that way about The Exorcist is because in 1973, nobody had ever seen a possession film of that caliber. It was super scary for the time period, and yeah, in 1973, it was the scariest movie ever made. You know how Terrifier 2 was last year? That's how it was in 1973 with that original movie. That's why I love it so much. The problem with that is that over the course of the past 50 years, there have been countless possession films that are just ripping off The Exorcist. One comes out nearly every year now. The Pope's Exorcist being the latest installment in that subgenre. So it's simply just not shocking anymore to watch a little girl get possessed and throw up all over a priest. It was in 1973, I can tell you that much. The reports from the original movie are insane. Now, while I think the idea of rebooting The Exorcist is ridiculous, come December of 2020, it was announced that David Gordon Green would be directing a requel of the franchise. It was also announced at the same time that Jason Blum would be producing the film, representing Blumhouse. This is a joint venture production between Morgan Creek and Blumhouse because Morgan Creek owns the rights, Blumhouse knows how to make requels. A remake sequel, if you will. Another thing I want to add about the original Exorcist film is that it's commonly cited as the scariest film ever made. I strongly disagree with that. I think in 1973, absolutely it was, for sure, but many films have topped it in that time period, I think. It's been 50 years, you're telling me nothing tops The Exorcist? So what, does that mean like every horror film from the past 50 years has sucked? I don't think so. I think many movies have topped it personally. The Shining, Hereditary, It Follows, just to name a few. But with that being said, many people will go back and watch that original 1973 classic and feel very disappointed. I've had a friend recently that I showed it to and they were like, that's the scariest film ever made? I don't know about that. I think that's a shame personally. If you want to watch the original 1973 Exorcist, don't have your hopes that high. Like, it's a fantastic film in my opinion. It's one of my all-time favorite horror flicks, but it's not the scariest movie ever made. The reactions to the movie were insane. People were throwing up once Reagan went to the hospital. There's all these crazy reports of that. I feel like it's to its detriment now in 2023 because I don't think it's the scariest movie ever made, but it's still a fantastic slow burn about this sweet little girl turning into this evil little monster. Such a good movie. I couldn't recommend it more, but don't expect the scariest movie you've ever seen. Getting back on track here, flash forward to July of 2021. It was announced that Danny McBride and Scott Teems were also a part of the creative team and that they came up with the story in early 2020 over a Zoom call with Jason Blum and David Gordon Green. I would have done anything to be a fly on the wall just to listen to them talk about making a new Exorcist film. What was that conversation like? I think it's a totally different ballgame than making Halloween sequels too, because it's one thing to have, a guy in a mask running around killing people with a mystique behind him. That's pretty easy to write a story around in my opinion, but something like The Exorcist is a little more specific. I'm excited to talk about the trailer and the plot description a little later because I'm somewhat impressed. At the same time in July of 2021, it was also announced that this would be a trilogy of films just like the Halloween movies that David Gordon Green had directed beforehand. I'm not crazy about this at all. I don't think every requel series needs to be a trilogy, but the fact that they're doing this, it's exciting. Maybe they got this big story planned. I'm staying optimistic with this film, even though I have some big nasty negatives to talk about a little later on in this video. The thing that has me really worried about this trilogy element is that the latter 2 films, so The Exorcist Deceiver, we know is the title of the next one, these were optioned at one one point to be direct-to-streaming movies for Universal's fledgling streaming service, Peacock. I think maybe the people behind this film were looking at Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends, how the box office success was just nowhere near that of Halloween 2018. In my opinion, that's not due to the quality of those films, it's due to the fact that they released those films theatrically and on streaming at the same time. There's a lot of people who, if they don't have to go to the theaters, yeah, they're just gonna watch it at home for free on Peacock. Personally, I'm just not crazy about that at all. The only reason they do that is to prop up these streaming services that I just don't think are really worth anybody's time. I know some people simply can't make it out to the theaters, and I totally love and respect that. All the power to you guys. But if you're someone who can go to the theaters, go to the theaters to see movies. It'll mean more movies in the future. If we just keep watching things on streaming, maybe theaters will just go away. Let's make sure that doesn't happen. I'm not a big fan of streaming services. I just canceled all my subscriptions recently. Go see movies in the theaters, people. Another thing I want to note about the writers of this film is that technically the screenplay was only written by David Gordon Green and Peter Sattler, but the story was conceived by Scott Teems, David Gordon Green, and Danny McBride. I'm just a little worried that there's too many cooks in the kitchen. When you have a big story like this and so many people have their hands in it, everyone wants to pull something a different way. Like, unless this is an anthology movie like a VHS or a creep show, you know, where everyone's directing their own segment of something, that's a different story. But this is one story that 4 people are trying to tell now. It's gonna get a little messy, in my opinion. The cast for this film is actually pretty exceptional. We have Ellen Burstyn and Linda Blair reprising their roles as Chris and Reagan McNeil from the original film back in this new flick. Ellen Burstyn, bless her heart, is 90 years old this year, turning 91. I think that's absolutely amazing. Not only is she fantastic in that first movie, but this is just commendable that she would be working still in her 90s. Hats off to you, Ellen. From the trailer, we kind of learned what Ellen Burstyn's role will be in this film, probably just to give advice to our characters who are dealing with their daughters being possessed. Linda Blair's role as Reagan, though, is one that I'm not 100% sure about. What is going to go on with that? Why is Reagan going to get thrown into the mix here? I'm really excited to see how they do that. Notable new members of the cast include Leslie Odom Jr., Ann Dowd, Jennifer Nettles, and Okwe Okpok-Wasili. Some interesting notes about the cast members here is that all the way back in December of last year, while they were filming this thing, it was announced that Leslie Odom Jr. had to stop production due to a vague health complication. It's never been made public what was going on there, but Leslie, I hope you're okay, man. Are you okay, Aaron Burr, sir? Ann Dowd is in this film as well, who plays a pretty substantial role in Hereditary, a film that's constantly been compared to The Exorcist for having the same effect in 2018 that film had in 1973. Jennifer Nettles is the lead singer of country band Sugarland. I don't listen to them at all, but that's a fun fact. And Okwe Okpok-Wasili is this crazy choreographer and performer. I highly recommend checking out her work. I could definitely see her getting possessed by Pazuzu at some point in this film. That's all I'm gonna say. So now let's talk a little bit about the filming process for this movie, where a lot of my issues lie. In early 2022, while David Gordon Green and company were busy filming Halloween Ends, they had to accommodate Ellen Burstyn, who wanted to get her scenes out of the way due to the ongoing pandemic at the time. Now, like I said earlier, Ellen is currently 90 years old, going on 91 this year. They had to accommodate to her if they wanted to get her in this movie, of course, but why didn't they delay Halloween Ends? Besides my criticisms of the overall concept of Halloween Ends, the film just simply feels rushed. There are entire sequences that feel like the first delivery of a certain take. There are performances from actors that feel completely out of character, especially from Jamie Lee Curtis, and I just don't like the film at all. It feels so unbelievably rushed. The cinematography is uninspired. A lot of the movie feels uninspired. It's almost like they could have spent a little more time on that film opposed to working on the next thing that they were doing already. I mean, they were working on this film in 2020 moving forward. It almost feels like they didn't care about those latter 2 Halloween films that they made at all. That just kind of sucks as a big Halloween fan, that they wanted to just move on to this. This has to be good because it's the start of a trilogy. I get that from a business standpoint, and sure, you are making a product at the end of the day, but this is also art. You can't rush art. You just can't. That's like the first rule of art. I just wish they didn't sacrifice the quality of some of those later Halloween films to work on this. We could have waited for those Halloween movies and then gotten this film out for the 50th anniversary and all that. Then they could have spent more time on this, and all of these things could have been good. We just wouldn't have seen them yet. I also want to quickly apologize about something. I recently blamed David Gordon Green for this in my review for Halloween Ends back in October of last year, and that was just very wrong of me. He does not have any control of that, and now that I know more about the business, I realize how really stupid that comment was. My apologies to David and company. That was just a really stupid thing for me to say. Principal photography for The Exorcist Believer started in November of 2022 and wrapped in March of 2023, so they had way longer to film this than Halloween Ends. I have a lot more faith in this movie than that film. Now, since the film wrapped back in March of this year, there have been some early test screenings with some, well, negative reception. Now, I want to clarify that these are only rumors. This information comes from third-party sources, but to my knowledge of what I've heard, there have been multiple early test screenings that were received pretty poorly. Although many people got to see the trailer early before Oppenheimer this past weekend, the trailer finally released on YouTube today. Breaking it down a little bit, yes, some of my worries about the film are present in the trailer, but there are some things that really surprised me as well. There are some generic sequences, like you get one of the girls who's possessed at that point and she walks into this church saying all this demonic shit. I don't care for that at all. That seems like something that I would have seen in any Exorcist film from the past 20 years, just pretty generic. But then there are things that surprise me. There's this sequence in the back half of the trailer where the two girls possessed at the same time have their heartbeats in sync with each other, indicating that they're both possessed by the same entity. That's a really creative idea that I f***ing love. I do want to quickly compare this to The Force Awakens real quick though, which if you look at the plotline of that movie, it's essentially just A New Hope, episode 4 in the Star Wars universe. Except this time around, instead of a moon-shaped spaceship that they have to blow up, it's the size of a planet. So it's a little bigger. This is very parallel to that idea in the sense that you now have 2 little girls possessed by Pazuzu opposed to 1 in the original. So that has me a little worried, but maybe this is good. Maybe there's some good to be had with this film. If I met somebody who really wanted to see The Exorcist, had never seen it before, and they were like, oh, I really want to watch it, what can you tell me about it? I would say I can tell you nothing. And anything you think you know about the film, throw that out of your brain immediately. I think that we need to approach this film the same way that newcomers do to the original Exorcist. Don't go into it with these high expectations. Don't expect the scariest movie you've ever seen. Go into it just to watch a cool movie. That's how we should feel about this upcoming movie. If there's any little shred of something fun or good in this film, I'll see it as a success. The plot of the film is about 2 little girls who go missing. When they come back to their parents 3 days later, they're possessed by Pazuzu. Their father then has to reach out to Chris McNeil and ask for help. Like, listen, there's a lot of that sounds generic, but the idea of 2 little girls going missing, coming back possessed is pretty interesting. I think that there's going to be some creative ideas in this film that will render some potential. My expectations for the film are a little low at this point, but honestly, the trailer was way better than the disaster that I thought this was going to be. So go ahead, complain and say that this is going to be the worst disaster of all time, but honestly, I'm expecting a 5 out of 10 from this movie, and that's not bad. That's average. That's not a disaster. So many people can't look at a movie anymore and say that it's just average. I watched Oppenheimer this past weekend, and there was things I didn't care for about it, but I still gave it an 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. It was a fucking killer movie. That doesn't mean it's bad. An 8 out of 10 is really good. If someone reviewed my movie and said it was an 8 out of 10, that would be awesome. But to say that I'm excited for a movie that just looks average is okay. That's all right. I think it was Chris Stuckman that said in his review for the Flash movie that, like, this isn't the worst thing he's ever seen, but it's also not fantastic either, and that's okay. It's not the worst movie I've ever seen either. I gave that one a 4 out of 10. I can see from the trailer and from things I've heard about it that there was some care and love thrown into this, and I don't think it's the filmmaker's fault if this movie is just average. Take a lesson from me and don't just blame the filmmaker when something sucks. Look at the studio. Look at what their plan is for these movies and see how they're maybe not doing it in the best way possible. This is a haphazard film schedule that is completely insane. If there's anything good about any of these movies that are coming out, including Halloween Ends, which yes has some good to it, that's a win in my book. The Exorcist Believer comes out on October 13th of this year, and honestly, I'm kind of excited for it. As well as the sequel, The Exorcist Deceiver, that comes out on April 18th of 2025. I can't wait for the 3rd film in the franchise, The Exorcist Wide Receiver, where Pazuzu joins the NFL. That's gonna be a fun one in 2027. What are your thoughts on The Exorcist Believer, though? Leave me something about it in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching this brand new video on The Exorcist Believer. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more horror content in the future. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, especially if you want to co-host my podcast with me. The link for that is in the description below. Thank you all again for watching, and as always, don't forget to kill it out there, y'all.